Well, good morning, Jim.
Hey, Ralph, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
For some of our listeners, it's not morning, you know.
That could be true. You can listen anytime, and you should.
Yes, and if you haven't listened lately to the new stuff, go back and listen to some of the old stuff. We were talking about that a little bit ago, right, Ralph?
We were. Now, one of the
There's some
things
good old stuff in that vault.
there is, yes, back in the days. One of the things that I want to ask our listeners today: how many of you have ever, at some point, walked away from a conversation with somebody that you know who said something to you that made you feel bad? Probably some of you have. Maybe a lot of you have. And one of the things that we want to talk about today is how to be more thick-skinned.
Okay, well, the last two podcasts were on happiness. You know, and one of the things we talked about a couple of weeks ago is positive psychology.
Right.
But, it's hard sometimes to be positive all the time, right, Ralph?
It is. And being positive all the time is probably not a good way to live, because life is hard. It sends you trauma. And, when your good old dog Rover dies,
And your wife goes off with your best friend in
Yeah.
your pickup truck. That one.
yeah, and
I'm going to miss that truck.
Yeah, I'm going to miss that dog, yeah. But the thing is that, you have to be realistic about your expectations. But the other thing about somebody criticizing you is it really says more about them and where they are than it says about you.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, suppose Jim, I was a person of color, and I said, Jim, you're a racist.
Okay. I have been called that by people of color.
And what was your response?
No, I'm not.
And what did they say?
Oh, yes, you are. All white people are racists.
Okay.
And we've been doing this implicit bias course, and there's some truth to that, isn't there?
There is. But the thing is, he is or she is correct in their perception. All white people tend to be biased towards other white people. But the thing is, that says something about where they're coming from. It doesn't say anything about how you act or treat people of color. So it's not about you necessarily, it's about them.
Yeah. I can remember when there was a counselor at this university at Central Michigan. His name was Will, and we were just talking. He was an acquaintance. We were just talking one day, and that's when he said, I was a racist. And so I said, no, I'm not. And all white people are. He said, I am more comfortable. He said, I was more comfortable growing up in Texas than I am growing up in Michigan, because in Texas I knew what people thought of me, and I could moderate my behavior. Whereas up here in Michigan, everything looks kind of good on the surface, but if the chips go down, I know where they're going to fall. That sort of took me aback, but I didn't get. I saw it from his point of view.
Yeah. And the thing is, I guess, that you can say, see the facts and the subjectivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So most criticisms are just basically somebody's personal opinion.
Subjective opinion. Okay. Yeah.
So you have to say, okay, they can believe that.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I am what they're accusing me of or criticizing me for.
Okay.
They have that opinion, and I guess I can work to change that opinion,
Mm-hmm.
but how hard do I want to work?
Okay. Yeah. good point. It's just leaving it, with the status quo with my colleague was, the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got your opinion.
I've got mine,
Yeah.
and we're okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things that a lot of people feel is kind of defensive whenever somebody aims a critique at them. And one of the real underlying things about that is, do you or don't you believe in yourself?
Yeah, Ralph, one of the things that we see a lot and we hear a lot about is the toxic effects of social media.
Yeah,
People getting bullied, cyberbullied on social media. That would be people saying untrue things about you, right?
Right.
Or harmful, hurtful things.
yeah,
And apparently that has sent a lot of folks, particularly maybe preteens and teens, into a real tailspin.
yeah. Some of them to the point of suicide, a lot of them to the point of acute depression. And, you have to be able to look at yourself and say, I am a good person. I behave mostly in good ways. Everybody slips now and again, but most of the time I try and live well. And so I believe in myself. I think I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, then a lot of this cyberbullying stuff, you can say, not important to me.
Okay, yeah. I just think about that, Ralph. You and I go back a long way, and I remember you as a kid and as a preteen, as a teen. You weren't necessarily a bully, but you were a bit of an outlaw.
Yeah, that's a fair description. I'm not going to deny it.
And I think you're still an outlaw at heart.
Well, probably true, but I have learned to ameliorate my behavior so that I fit into society.
No, you don't. You were a university professor.
Well, yeah, okay, and not only that, but I'm a conservative university professor. I really don't fit.
Oh,
But one of the things that you can do when you hear somebody criticizing you, don't mull that over. Don't take it away and nurse it to your bosom and say, oh, I feel really wounded. I am going to think about this over and over and over. Because when you do that, it just reinforces that faulty message in your brain.
Mm-hmm. Now, are some people thin-skinned about, say, things they might hear on radio or television when a particular commentator says something that X is a good person or Y is a bad person? Does that feed into this?
I think so, yeah. I mean, you get people who look at, for example, some political figure, and you tune in one station and they will be saying, so-and-so is a really good XY senator, congressman, whatever. And you turn on to another station and they're saying, so-and-so is a doofus and should not be a congressman or a senator.
Now, if I'm on the first side, the first station, when I hear the former president is a doofus, does that wound me in some way?
Well, it can. If you get your knickers in a knot and say, he is not,
Mm-hmm.
And then you get all up in arms, and then the next time you hear another thing criticizing the former president, you say, well, I'm just going to, call into that station and tell them how full of baloney they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, now this is not on script at all, but I wonder how much push the media has on some of the violence that we've seen in our last 20 years or so in our country.
I think they have a lot. No, I'm going to give our listeners an example which you may or may not take as factual, but think back to 2020. We had Antifa, we had BLM riots throughout the United States.
Okay.
Okay? And you look at that and you say, well, how were they described? One side described them as protests, the other side described them as riots.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I can remember very well is seeing a reporter from one of the major networks standing in front of a crowd which was clearly in the midst of some sort of social unrest, riots, signs, waving, people yelling, people hitting each other. And in the background, there was a huge fire.
Okay.
And the commentator described the protests, which are fiery but mostly peaceful. Okay?
Okay.
You've got a huge fire in the background
Mhm.
because the federal courthouse has been firebombed, and you've got a guy describing it as mostly peaceful. There's a sort of
A little disconnect there.
yeah,
It's like being what did you say earlier? A conservative professor?
yeah,
That's like
or military intelligence.
oxymorons all the way. I
All the
just
way.
wanted to, I mean, we're circling back, or I wanted to get that one in.
Yeah.
So listening to people can push your buttons too.
Right.
What else have you learned about
Well,
being more thick-skinned?
You know, one of the good things to do, and you're always trying to say, well, what's good then? If I know I'm thick-skinned or thin-skinned, what should I do? Well, spend more time with people who affirm you. Minimize the time you spend with those people who put you down.
Okay.
So that applies even to cyberbullying. You know, cyberbullying doesn't have any effect on anybody if they don't listen to it.
Right. Right.
So, you know, you get online and you go to your site and you find 12 adverse comments. Do you read them? No.
Delete.
You maybe read the first line and somebody says, "You're a snake oil salesman," or whatever, and you say, "Okay, I'm not reading that one." You know, and it's basically discard the people who put you down and spend time with the people who build you up.
Good point. You know, something else that occurs to me is that if we could find somebody who is more thick-skinned than we, that would be a good role model for us, right?
Yeah.
No.
You know, that Jordan Peterson in 12 Rules for Life says, spend time with people who are good people, i.e. they affirm you, and spend no time with people who put you down. And, you know, I think if there's anybody in modern society in terms of public figures, Peterson is a classic example of somebody who has learned to tolerate criticism well.
Okay. Now, I want to make a point here, Ralph, that we're talking about criticism that is what?
Personal,
Unfair, perhaps.
unfair.
Subjective. Okay. Now, you know, I've been a researcher all my life, and at the university we are really pushed to publish our research. And I've gotten, I don't know, 50 or so research articles. And they all went through a peer review. And I would send my beautiful article in, and I would get a 3-page letter and my beautiful article back, all marked up and with 3 pages of notes, you know, criticizing what I did. Now, what did that make me do? Did that make me go into a corner and weep?
Probably not. It made you say, okay,
I see the...
I see their point. Is this criticism warranted? Yes, it is. Okay, so I have to take my immortal, deathless prose that nobody has ever written anything on this better than what I've written, and revise it.
Mm-hmm. And guess what? I might even be asked to revise it again.
Yeah.
Now, you were an English professor early on. Did you ever ask people to revise things?
I did.
Did anyone ever get really ticked off?
No, because when I asked somebody to revise a paper, I was able to show them where they went wrong and what they needed to do.
Okay, so that brings us back to that very first statement that you came up with, distinguishing between objective stuff and subjectivity.
Yeah,
If you had just written on their paper, this is a bunch of crap, that would not have,
it wouldn't have been helpful.
no, okay, good
So
point.
one of the things that people did not like about my system of marking was I would say to students on day one, everybody in this class has a potential for getting an A on your final grade.
And everyone has a potential of getting an F.
Yeah. And they would say, what do you mean? And I would say, okay, if you do all of the revisions I ask you to, which will be fair revisions because I'll be able to tell you where you went wrong and why and what to do. If you make those revisions, at the end of the course you'll get an A. Because nobody writes a perfect first draft for their boss, their peer reviewers, or their professor.
Of course.
Of course. So the thing is, everybody in the real world gets things sent back to them saying, make a few changes, or do this better, or do this over.
Make this clearer, yeah.
You know,
Okay.
and so that's what we're going to do here. It's going to be just like the real world. You do your best, and I tell you where you didn't succeed, and then I'll tell you how to succeed.
Okay, so you really went the extra step into making the individual not feel defensive or under attack, right?
Right, and the thing is that most people I think are pretty reasonable when they see not that they've just been given a scroll on the bottom, this is crap, but see me about this because we need to talk about some things that should be added or should be changed.
Mm-hmm.
They come and they say, well, yeah, that makes sense. So
what's the takeaway here, Ralph, with thick-skinnedness versus thin-skinnedness?
Well, I think the idea, Jim, is basically a very simple one. If you're given a criticism and immediately at the time you recognize that the criticism has some validity, you should think about changing your behavior. If, on the other hand, you say, that's the way he or she feels, but I don't see myself like that, then you should discard it and walk away saying, I don't feel bad.
Well, some good advice and words to live by, Ralph.
Yeah, and speaking of good advice, want to remind our listeners to
Keep your stick on the ice, because we're all in this together. Good.
Yeah.